Well, it's been some time since Israel went in and basically cleared Gaza of most of Hamas's forces. It took some time, but still, what is going on now in Gaza? What is the latest there after this ceasefire agreement that had been made? Is there a ceasefire? Are there remnants of Hamas still patrolling around in Gaza? Well, someone who was just there this week is Paul Petitte from CBN News. He joins us to talk about it. Paul, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Dan. Good to be here.
Yeah, so tell me about this. You got access to go into Gaza, so let's just start and talk about what you saw there while you were on the ground and what you were supposed to see.
Well, yeah, we were invited, CBN News was, to a particular outpost that sits pretty much central in Gaza, and that outpost is all about 200 yards away from the yellow line. That yellow line basically separates Israeli territory from Gaza territory. And that's an area that's heavily guarded, lots of surveillance by the IDF, Israeli troops there, to ensure that that yellow line is not crossed. This yellow line is the one that President Donald Trump and as well as his coalition, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, set up as sort of a no-go zone for both sides in this effort. And until this supposed peace plan works itself out from 4 months ago, but as your graphic says right there on the screen, it's pretty much been a stalemate now. In other words, there's been really no new developments since that ceasefire was announced back 4 months ago. And so our tour was to go over to the outpost, kind of see everything that's happening now, what the troops are up against, what's been going on, sort of the quote unquote ceasefire or lack thereof, I should say, and what they're up against at this point in time.
Yeah, you mentioned in your report that one of the soldiers, an IDF soldier, had been wounded just from these spats that happened, right? They're, like you said, a couple hundred yards away from where Hamas terrorists are, and they come out and shoot and do things like that. I mean, these are the sorts of things you don't see in the mainstream media. They usually, what happens is they wait until Israel is essentially forced to respond, and then it's like, oh, look at Israel going, into Gaza again with another offensive. Is that kind of what you saw there, or what at least the reports were?
Yeah, that's exactly my thinking when I went in there, Dan, is that we really haven't seen anything about any updates on the ceasefire. Of course, all attention now has been turned to what's going on in Iran, and understandably so. But in the minds of most people, particularly in Western media and probably throughout the world, the ceasefire has held. Well, the truth is the ceasefire is anything close to being held. I spoke with a lieutenant colonel there who's the foreign spokesperson for the IDF, and he says attacks, skirmishes by Hamas terrorists crossing the yellow line happen almost on a daily basis. Matter of fact, you're looking at a video right now of one of those. These things happen on a regular basis with troops there, where Hamas terrorists will cross the line. Basically, he says, trying to test the resolve, if you will, of the troops and see if they will act. Sometimes it's just being quote in the wrong place at the wrong time, so they say. I've heard stories from the lieutenant colonel saying that some will say, well, we're looking for a body of one of the hostages. Well, the truth is all the hostages have been recovered. So they know the truth. There is no more hostages to be recovered. They're again testing the resolve. Sometimes they just have weapons with them and they outright attack an IDF troop who happens to be patrolling on that yellow line area. This is happening, Dan, on a regular basis. Again, you don't hear about it in the mainstream media, but that ceasefire, you have to put quotations around because it really hasn't held up. And it is happening at a pace that's ridiculously constant. And, this is an ongoing effort, and it's really testing the resolve of the IDF troops. And you could tell they're somewhat exasperated by this because 4 months ago, there was supposed to be a ceasefire, and they're just simply not seeing that.
Well, and you get the sense, and maybe you get the sense that the IDF soldiers that you were with, Paul, I wonder if they either hinted at this or talked about it, but you get the sense that Hamas kind of understands the media landscape, and they sort of know, like, all right, well, we can go do this. We're not going to get blamed for it, and then anyone who does, they're just going to call them as propagandists for Israel. So they can go out and do this, and then they know the media is not going to have this sort of shocked response until Israel does something significant in return. Do they feel that? Do you get the sense that maybe that Hamas kind of understands the media landscape in that way?
I think they've always understood it from day one, back over 2 years ago when October 7th happened. Is Hamas basically, they had the media in their back pocket ever since. And you go on social media and you see for yourself, who's backing Israel in this war on terror, who's backing Hamas, and it's pretty off keister here in that regard. And so, yeah, to your point, this is going on daily. Israel's talking about it daily, but then you turn on the news back in the States, and again, I've only been here since this week, so I've been tuning into the news for the last month back home in the United States, and you don't see any of this. But yet, when it happens on the other side, they'll say maybe a child was injured, and there's stories where there's outposts. I'll give you, for instance, here, Dan, that IDF knows that terrorists are, and they will literally send a young boy or a child out in front of it to keep and shield them from being shot at or test that yellow line. They'll basically use them as human shields. And if something dire should happen or that child gets injured, well, of course, the health ministry, quote unquote, which is basically Hamas, will tell the media or the AP that a child was injured here, fired upon by IDF troops. And then the story goes on again. What? A child injured at the hands of Israel. And this is the ongoing genocide that they claim has been happening since October 7th. So basically, when you have the AP and the foreign media in your back pocket, you could use it at will, and they're testing it at will at this very moment.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because they take that and then just run with it, and it's important more than ever for people like you, Paul, to get this kind of access on the ground and actually see with your eyes what's going on there, because we're in a time where nobody believes anything they see. And so, with AI and everything else that's going on, and people take images and then they say, look what Israel did. And you find out, oh, wait, that was, from some other place 10 years ago or something. It's like they just take the picture and fake label, and then it goes viral. And then it kind of the damage is done from a propaganda perspective. So there's so much of that going on, but when you see it, it's incredible. And I've talked about it before, Paul, but I was in Israel reporting when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and there were protests there on the border at Gaza, and the IDF showed us images from Hamas websites about what they wanted to do if they got through the border. And I kid you not, it was exactly the plan that they ended up doing on October 7th. It was, we're going to infiltrate, we're going to go to these kibbutzes, we're going to kill Israelis. That's basically what it said. And he showed me this map, and of course the media was just criticizing Israel at this time for defending its border there. And then we see what happens, and I feel like it's the same thing. And now that they're in Gaza, it's the same thing playing out now in just a little bit different of a way. But when you were there, Paul, given that whole dynamic that's going on and they're having to deal with that narrative that always plays out, did you get a sense at all about what the morale is like among the IDF that you were embedded with?
You can tell they're pretty fatigued, a lot of them. They're constantly refreshing and renewing their troops, but they've been pulling these reserves, and they've been calling on these soldiers for the better part of 2 years now. And the fact that where I was at yesterday, they're still seeing these skirmishes going on where people are purposely crossing the yellow line, testing their resolve. It's fatiguing. Why? Because not only is there supposed to be a ceasefire in place, but Hamas is supposed to be disarming. None of that has happened. And this is 4 months out from when the ceasefire was first announced. So everybody's wondering, okay, when is this actually going to happen? And in their minds, I think they pretty much know it is not going to happen, because Hamas simply, if you've studied anything of Islam, anything of the Palestinians, their goal is to wipe out Israel. You think they're in solidarity, just hand their weapons over and say, okay, live and let live. Let's all sing Kumbaya and be happily ever after. No, that's not going to happen. They're not going to hand over their weapons. And so that's still being worked out. So there's this complete unclarity going on about, okay, what are the next steps going on in Gaza? when is this disarmament supposed to take place? How is it going to take place? Will force have to be used for it to take place? Because Hamas has been obstinate about the whole thing, and they have not publicly declared that they will lay down their arms. And so now there's talk out of Washington possibly of a phased-in deal of laying down their arms. In other words, they'll allow Hamas to keep maybe small weapons, but yet force them to turn over large weapons capable of striking Israel. Well, anybody who's watched video of October 7th, though, they started off with the missiles, but they came in with small weapons. They came in with machine guns. They came in with knives. They slaughtered people with those small weapons. So the fact that, okay, you can keep your small weapons for a time, is that going to work? I think any Israeli, any IDF soldier will tell you that can't work, and it won't work, and it would put them in peril once again. So in talking with the lieutenant colonel and others, you pretty much hear this constant banter, and that is this, that it's not going to happen without force. Hamas is not going to lay down their arms willingly, and it's going to come to a head, and it's going to come to a very ugly head here if nobody steps in from a diplomatic level and says, okay, here's how it's going to happen. Hamas, you must surrender your weapons. Now, there is a meeting next week with the Board of Peace. It'll be the first one. Trump is going to lead that meeting, and we'll see what comes out of that. But as of right now, the IDF is completely prepared to go in and remove those weapons by force.
Yeah, that's what it looks like is happening. I appreciate that information there. And I would imagine Israel's wrestling. We've been talking a lot about the media narratives. I would imagine they're wrestling with knowing this truth that, like you said, Hamas has not publicly said they're going to lay down or promise to actually completely disarm. And we know their stated goals. So it's highly likely they're going to keep persisting in some way, shape, or form, which would then, again, force Israel to take a heavier handed action. And given that media landscape, they have to be calculating what the international reaction is going to be to this. Now, I know that they're very used to people criticizing them. This is nothing new, despite what some people are saying out there. Israel is probably the most criticized nation on the planet, but you're starting to see factions even on the right, some high-profile people criticizing Israel. So do you think that plays into it at all, or is Israel just kind of like, you know what, whoever's with us, and who's not is not, and we're going to do what we have to do? Do they still have that sense? Because I feel like they had it after October 7th, but it's been a couple years now, as you've said.
Yeah, I think, Dan, that they realize they're sort of on an island here, the United States and Israel, and I think they're well prepared to go about it alone. They understand the culture here. They understand the history here in the Middle East. They understand that Israel has had and will continue to have a target on their back when it comes to the surrounding Islamic countries that wish to do them harm. None of that's going to change by any peace deal. How many peace deals have they had over the last few decades, since the time of Menachem Begin, and Arafat, and leading up to today? It just doesn't work. Peace deals don't work when you're talking with a group that really is set out to kill you, to destroy you, to wipe you off the face of the earth. That is the Quran. That is their goal. That's their stated goal. So they're not going to retreat from that in any way, shape, and form. And so I think Israel, realized that, even though the rest of the world really can't put their arms around it because they really haven't done the homework, to do that. And so I think they are prepared to go about it alone if it takes that. And an interesting footnote on that is, I think what's been keeping restraint on Israel, not only the ceasefire deal that Trump put together, but also the fact that they were recovering their hostages. Well, the last hostage, as just recently in the last several weeks, the body of the last hostage has been recovered. What does that mean? Well, that means really there's no holds barred as far as any concern from the point of IDF to go in there and to attack at a higher level to do what needs to be done to finalize this ongoing war. Before that, there was concern that, they might, a hostage might get killed in the battle because they don't know where they're at. They may not have the intelligence. That's gone now. All the hostages are home, whether it be in bodily form or in living form. And so that really changes the game plan. And out here, what we're hearing and what we're learning is the IDF is getting ready to go in and to finish the job, if you will, to clear out Hamas by force, because that is the only way. It's the only way that it's the only language they speak and only way they understand. Because again, back to our earlier point, they're not willingly going to lay down their arms. And yeah, that's not going to look good for Israel. I don't know how you spin that in this anti-Semitic world that we're in, but they're going to have to do what needs to get done. Otherwise, they're going to be back to square one with the group that's looking to attack them once again.
Paul, so you got this access, and not a lot of people in the world can say they have been in Gaza. I mean, it's just it is what it is, right? It's been kind of cordoned off, this section of the world, to most people, and especially obviously after the invasion here a couple of years ago. What was it like there? You know, this is years after this invasion, like you got to traverse through a little bit of it. Just walk us through just kind of the feel, what it looked like, what you saw, what stood out just from what you saw.
Yeah, and it's important, you know, that I didn't get to go on a caravan all through, you know, throughout Gaza or Gaza City. But it actually brought up an interesting point. We were given the opportunity to go to a specific outpost there, again, in central part of Gaza, right off the yellow line, as I mentioned, which divides the territories between Israel and Gaza. But what was interesting that I noticed is, yeah, there was pockets of rubble that you could see where there was detonation, where there was battle and whatnot. But beyond that, you could see buildings that are completely, you know, intact. You couldn't see if there was commerce going on, but in talking with the troops there, they were saying, yeah, that's the part of Gaza where, and you can see in the background of some of those shots there, that, you know, sort of life goes on as usual. And I found it interesting, Dan, that anytime you see footage in the media of Gaza, what do you see? You see complete devastation. You know, you see those wide scenes of the crumbled buildings, just, you know, piled down to the rubble. But like here in Israel and frankly in Gaza, there's pockets everywhere where life goes on as usual. You know, it's not on the front of the war, and you can see in the background of that shot right there, but it's happening. But you don't see that in the nightly news at all. You don't see that life and commerce is going on as usual in Gaza. You only see the destruction and the rubble. So from my vantage point at the outpost, you got to see that, you know, there are specific targeted areas, but that doesn't basically tell the story of all of Gaza. Life is going on there, but these targeted attacks and the counterattacks by Israel will continue to pinpoint where they do. So for me, it's like getting an idea. Yeah, war's going on, but, you know, an hour from here, you know, it's life as usual. You go to the market, you're buying your bread, you're going to work.
Incredible, incredible stuff. Well, thank you for your reporting, sir. Definitely appreciate it. The insights there that you got, and I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us here on the YouTube channel to explain it for us. Thank you.
You bet. Always a pleasure, Dan.